The thing to know about citations, whether it be in-text or reference citations, is that both are formatted differently and they possess different rules for formatting, or how you actually incorporate them, or how you word them, or how you order them, capitalize them, etc. You have to know how to look the information up. If you use an in-text citation in a paper, you have to have a reference citation to back it up. If you use any type of reference citation in your references section, you have to have some sort of instance, at least one instance of using an in-text citation in your paper, in the content of your paper. You never want to have one that's floating alone without the other. They are connected. They're signaling. That's the nature of an attribution. When one sees an in-text citation, as I mentioned, they can refer to the references page to get more information on that source or how to locate that source. Here are some different examples of in-text citations. This is where style guides get very complex, because the way that you make these in-text citations within the structure of your sentences in your content depend upon how many authors there are in your source. The first is one author. As Ahmed, 2016, mentions rest of the sentence. Ahmed would be the last name of the author, and the year would be 2016 of publication. If you were to do this at the end of a sentence, like an in-text citation at the end of your sentence, it would be parentheses, last name of the author, comma, year. So this is what it would look like for one author. This is the most basic of example. But then if you look here with two authors, if you were to make an attribution by using the author's last name at the beginning of a sentence, you would say research by Wegner and Petty, year of publication, 1994, supports the idea that blah, 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 blah. And if you were using, conversely, an in-text citation at the end of the sentence, instead of using it at the beginning like this, it would be Wegner, ampersand, Petty, comma, year. Here we have, really what we're looking at here is how we're referring to the authors, or the number of authors. One author, you have author, year in parentheses, and then at the end of the sentence, if you're attributing in that way, it's author's last name, comma, year. Two authors, research by Wegner and Petty. Notice that and is spelled out here, and then in the in-text citation that would go at the end of the sentence, you use ampersand. That's something that throws a lot of people. But the rules with APA state that if you're attributing, if it's flowing within the logical pattern or within a sentence itself in your own content, you can spell out the word and. If you're incorporating an in-text citation at the very end of your sentence, you use ampersand. It's one of those nitpicky things with APA that you have to do. So you have first author, second author, comma, 1994, year of publication. You'll notice that the order of authors is important. In academic work, you always have a first author, that's the primary author. Then you have a second author, someone who follows second in line, in order of importance, if you will. And then a lot of work. Sometimes you'll see journal entries or sources that have 10 or 15 different authors. And so it's important to know, if I'm citing a source and I want to make an attribution in my document, I need to know how many authors there are, because I need to know either it's going to be cited as one author, two author. If it's more than two authors, then it's going to follow the multiple authors format down here, which utilizes the et structure. So this would be first author, et period, comma, 1993. This indicates, and this is what would follow at the end of the sentence. I kind of reversed the order here. If it were to go at the beginning of the sentence, it would be last name of the first author, et period, year of publication, suggests that, whatever. And at the end of your sentence, it would be last name of first author, et comma, period, year of publication. This et is Latin, and it just means multiple authors. It means that there are more authors, and when you start diving into research that is inherently complex and has so many different authors, instead of sitting and wasting space and listing 20, 25, 30, 35 different authors, that does happen. Instead of doing that, if it's more than two authors, then you just simply use etal. But you have to use all of this punctuation. You have to include the comma here. You have to include the ampersand here if it's two authors with the comma. And if you're using the et-al structure, you have to have the period and then the comma. The comma separates the elements. So author, comma, year. So even if we're using the et-al structure, the et-al has a period, but we still have to separate with a comma to put the publication year in there. I'm going to show you how to look this information up, but I wanted you to know these are the basic ways when you're making your in-text citations that you do so based on how many authors are in your source. So when you are sorting, or when you are citing or making attributions within your document or within your text, it's all going to depend on how many authors there are. So it's useful to know that, you already know how many authors are in the sources you're going to integrate so that you know how to make these types of citations or attributions. Conversely, if we're looking at the reference citation, so this is what comes at the end of your paper, and it depends totally upon what type of source you're using. It's just showing you, it's a correlation, if you will, or congruence, if you will. A single author would look like this: last name, comma, first initial, year of publication, title, publication. And so this is going to be a book. This is a book, a published book. But it's only one author, and that's what it looks like. Two authors, last name, first initial, middle initial if it's available, and last name, first initial, middle initial of the second author, year of publication, the title. And oftentimes you see titles written like this. You have a precursor with a colon and then a more specific title, and it's all considered a title. This is an academic journal, so you have the journal title, you have the issue number, the volume number, because these things come out in different years, different months, and in different variances. And so you have an issue and a volume number, and then the page number of that reference. And then a DOI. The DOI is a specific link that refers directly to that source. But what's important here is this is one author, this is two authors. Notice the use of the ampersand here. And then multiple authors. When in text we use the et-al structure, the multiple authors within the reference citation, we list out. So we list every single author following the same structure, year of publication, title, the title of the journal, the issue, volume, page number, and all of these specifics have to do with what type of source it is. If it were a video, you would do this completely different, but the author and the year would stay the same. If this were a newspaper article, these would be done differently. If these were PhD dissertations, you would cite these differently. So the important thing to note here is the authors. How many authors are involved will determine how you do your citations or how you make your citations in your document. And then you have to look up what type of source you're using to figure out how to make a reference citation. Quotations. When do I use quotes? So quotations are used to support and illustrate points in your essay. They help establish your credibility or ethos by demonstrating that you're familiar with key sources. So say, for instance, you're going directly to a primary source to pull something from the heart of an initial source to use it in your own argument. You might want to quote a source. You might want to quote something from any other source. If the meaning is hard to paraphrase in your own words and the wording is perfect, so much so that you think the audience is going to receive it in a better way if you quote it or you pull in the original material, you can use a quote. There's no issue with that, but the quotes are the exact verbatim words from the source. It's up to you to determine when to quote and how long each quotation should be. So I tend to tell people to use what I call the 80-20 rule. 80% of a research paper or any academic writing should be your own content or paraphrased, where you're taking sources and you're putting it in your own words, but yet you're still providing citations in text and reference. Quotations, if you're pulling a quote in only use it when the exact quote matters, when the exact words or the order of the words or the emotion of the words or the data or the logic is really crucial for your audience to understand a point. Oftentimes when you're discussing complex issues, ideas, or phenomena, certain data points in a study are presented in a certain way within a quote that you just have to pick that up and put it in your own work and put it in your own paper verbatim. That's fine. But just make sure that 80% of your paper is your own, or it's paraphrasing sources, and 20% would be pulling a quote over. There are two types of quotes. There is a standard quote and a block quote. I'll be honest, this is perfect. Looking at the APA Purdue out. If you are making a regular quoted citation, it would look something like this. So this is an attribution by author at the beginning of the sentence, according to last name Jones, 1998, comma. And this is the quote coming directly from the source. Students often had difficulty using APA style, especially when it was their first time. Notice the punctuation is after the page number here, page 199. That correlates to the first type of in-text citation we looked at. If you were looking at it in title format, which was the second way we looked at it, Jones, last name of the author, 1998, found, here's the quote, students had difficulty using APA style, page number. What implications does this have for teachers? And so it really depends on how you're making your attribution, but a quote is going to be encapsulated in quotation marks. You're not going to add anything different in there. It's verbatim. It's coming straight from your source. But it depends on how you're quoting your source. Say for instance, you start a sentence with a quote like this, then you would have an in-text citation that comes at the end of your sentence. Now, if you have a long quote, specifically, if you are quoting 40 more words in a quote, it's going to be a block quote, and it's formatted differently. This is one of those style guide things that will drive you crazy. You always have to highlight your quotes in your Word document to see how many words are in it. You can see that in your Word document. When you highlight it in Word, it'll show in your toolbar how many words you've highlighted. If it's 40 or more, it's going to be in a format that looks like this. And you'll notice they introduced the quote, Jones's 1998 study, author's last name, year. So they're making an attribution with the author's last name and a verb, study, found the following. It's not in present tense because this has to do with a particular point in time. And then the quote that they're using is here. And you'll notice there's no quotation marks. The only thing that you find different is that the punctuation, instead of being outside of the parenthetical citation, is at the end of the sentence. It will drive you crazy trying to memorize how to do this stuff. So I'm going to show you how you find how to do that. But the basic rules are what's important. You have to know if you are making a quote with more than 40 or more words, how you do this and where to go to find how you format it. You're never going to memorize it. So let me do this. I'm going to navigate back over. If it'll let me. Here we go. When you're using sources and quotations, they have to be properly punctuated, which means you have to figure out where that period goes. You have to figure out where the parentheses goes, where the comma goes. It has to be correct. You can't just, I think this is correct, I'm going to halfway do this. It has to be correct, which means you have to know where to go to find the information to figure out how to do this correctly. It has to be properly documented, which means it has to be a source that you can provide the information for in your reference citation and also in your in-text citation. But when you're also using sources in text, you have to fit it in the grammar of your sentence, which means it has to flow with the original pattern of your sentence. It still has to be a complete sentence. It has to fit in that natural flow. The in-text citations that occur at the end of a sentence is not so much an issue, but if you're making an attribution using the author's last name and a verb and a year at the beginning of a sentence, we have to make sure that the verbiage makes it flow and it flows naturally within sentences. We already talked about that. Only use quotations when the exact wording is necessary in order to make your point. Also, you quote if the exact wording captures information, tone, or emotion that would be lost if you reworded it in your own way. So, in other words, only